Tonight, Democratic delegates formally nominated Joe Biden for president on the second night of the Democratic National Convention. Night two kicked off with a focus of the party's past and future. The virtual keynote address featured 17 of the party's rising stars. Two former presidents, Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton, each made an appearance as they pushed voters to support Biden and running mate Kamala Harris. Biden focused on Latino voters today.
He's failed the Latino community time and again in order to satisfy the vicious right wing of his party that, in fact, just keeps feeding raw meat to. That's the opposite of what we should be doing in the country.
President Trump visited battleground state Arizona today. There, he slammed Biden and the Democrats on national security. The president says if Biden wins the presidential election, there will be, quote, a giant jailbreak for MS-13 and criminal gangs.